I've been a night security guard for 11 years, and I've heard every ghost story attached to every building I've ever worked. Hospitals, warehouses, old schools. People love to scare the new guy. After a while, you stop listening. You learn that the sounds old buildings make at night are just thermal expansion. Settling foundations, pipes contracting in the cold. You learn that shadows move because your eyes are tired and your brain is searching for patterns in the dark. You learn, above all, that nothing is watching you. I stopped believing that last part on the 14th of November, in the basement of the Millhaven office complex. On Route 9, the building was a 6-story commercial property that had sat mostly vacant since a pharmaceutical firm relocated in 2019. 2 tenants remained. On the upper floors, a small law office and a data management company, but the bottom 3 floors were empty. Stripped of furniture, the walls still showing the ghosts of picture frames and mounted displays. My job was simple: 2 walkthroughs per shift, check the perimeter doors, log any anomalies. Sit at the desk until 6 in the morning. I'd been doing it for 3 weeks without incident. The first strange thing happened at 1:20 a.m. I was at my desk on the ground floor, drinking bad coffee and reading, when the elevator doors opened. Nobody was inside. The elevator in that building needed a key card to operate past the ground floor. And to reach the ground floor from below, you needed the same card. There was no basement access without a key. I checked the log. No one had entered the building since the last employee left at 7:44 p.m. I wrote it down as a mechanical fault and did my first walkthrough early. The lower floors were empty. Stairwells clear. Every perimeter door sealed. I went back to my desk. At 2:55 a.m., the motion sensors on Sublevel 2 triggered. This was the deeper basement used originally for record storage. I'd been down there twice during my first week. Long corridors, low ceilings, the smell of old paper and moisture. The motion sensors down there were reliable. I'd never had a false trigger in 3 weeks. Protocol required me to investigate. I took my flashlight and my radio and went down. The stairwell to Sublevel 2 was at the far end of the building, past the loading dock corridor. I remember the sound my footsteps made, sharp and clean in the silence. When I pushed open the stairwell door, the air pressure changed slightly. Not a draft exactly, more like an equalization. The way a room feels when someone has recently vacated it. Sublevel 2 was a grid of corridors separated by old shelving units. Floor to ceiling, still loaded with archived binders nobody had bothered to remove. My flashlight swept the nearest corridor. Nothing. I moved deeper, checking each row methodically, the way I'd been trained. Motion sensor grid B was 2/3 of the way down the eastern corridor. When I reached it, the indicator light was green. Nominal. I stood there for a moment, listening. Buildings are never fully silent. There's always the hum of electrical systems, the occasional tick of pipes. What I heard in that corridor was different. There was a rhythm to it, not mechanical. More like the sound of someone breathing very slowly, very deliberately, from somewhere close but unseen. I turned in a full circle with the flashlight. Shelving units, binders, ceiling tiles, concrete floor. Nothing. Then I noticed that one of the shelving units, approximately 4 meters to my left, was sitting at a slight angle from the wall. The gap behind it was perhaps 30 centimeters. In the gap, the darkness was absolute. I don't know what made me stop rather than approach. I've replayed that moment hundreds of times, and I cannot explain it beyond saying that something told me with complete certainty that I should not put my flashlight beam into that gap. It was not courage or common sense. It was the same involuntary understanding an animal has when it senses a predator nearby, not thought. Just the cold arrest of instinct. I keyed my radio and called in a possible intruder to Central Dispatch. I told them I was securing Sublival 2 and requesting a police check. Then I backed slowly down the corridor, keeping my flashlight trained on the gap. When I was perhaps 8 meters away, I heard the shelving unit shift. Just slightly. A soft metallic scrape against the concrete floor, like something inside the gap had leaned its weight against the back of the unit. I left the corridor. I went up the stairs. I locked the sublevel door behind me and stood at my desk with all the lights on until the patrol car arrived at 3:31 a.m. 2 officers did a full sweep of sublevel 2. They found no one. The shelving unit had been moved. They confirmed the dust pattern on the floor showed it had been shifted recently, within days, but the space behind it was empty. One of the officers said it was probably a homeless person who'd heard them coming and used the other stairwell. Possible, I said, though I hadn't moved from the locked stairwell door for 36 minutes. They filed a report and left. I finished my shift. I handed off to the day guard at 6, drove home, and slept for 5 hours. When I woke up, I looked at the incident report I'd filled out and noticed that I'd unconsciously written, in the anomalies field, not possible intruder, but something in the gap. I don't remember choosing those words. I worked Millhaven for another 6 weeks before the lease with my company wasn't renewed. In that time, the elevator opened on its own for more times. The motion sensors on sublevel 2 triggered twice more, both times in the early hours, both times with nothing to show for it. I went down once and stood at the top of the eastern corridor and listened, and then turned around and went back upstairs without going further. I'm not embarrassed by that. My last night in the building, I was logging out at 5:45 when I noticed something on the security monitor. The sublevel to camera, channel 7, southeast corner. The image quality was poor old cameras, low resolution, but there was a shape in the southeast corner that I didn't remember being there before. I leaned in close to the monitor. The shape was tall and thin and very still, and it was positioned in the corner with its back to the camera. And I sat there for a long time trying to decide what I was looking at. At 5:58, 2 minutes before the day guard arrived, the shape turned around. The resolution was too poor to see anything clearly. That's what I told myself on the drive home. That's what I still tell myself when I wake up at 3 in the morning and lie in the dark, listening to my apartment settle around me. The resolution was too poor. I couldn't have seen what I thought I saw. I've requested desk duty since then. My supervisor thinks it's because of my knees. The smell came first. Not the dramatic rot you read about in crime novels. Not something that announces itself and demands you call someone. This was quieter. A low, sweet sourness that I noticed one Tuesday morning when I stepped into the hallway of my building. The kind of smell that lives at the back of your throat and refuses to leave. I told myself it was the garbage chute. I told myself a lot of things that week. I live alone on the 4th floor of a mid-rise apartment building in a mid-sized city. Nothing remarkable about either. The building was constructed in the early 80s, maintains a particular institutional ugliness. Beige walls, fluorescent stairwells, carpeting the color of old mustard. I moved in 3 years ago after my divorce, which tells you something about my state of mind at the time. I stopped noticing the ugliness eventually. You stop noticing most things, given enough time. My neighbor in 4B was a man named Gerald Foss. I knew this from the mail I occasionally misrouted, never from conversation. We had exchanged perhaps 40 words in 3 years, most of them variations of a nod. He was somewhere in his late 60s, thin and the way of men who forget to eat rather than men who try. He wore the same gray cardigan most days, kept irregular hours, and had the particular self-containment of someone who had decided, long ago, that the world had nothing left to offer him and had made peace with that decision. I respected it. I understood it. I first heard the sound on a Thursday night, sometime after midnight. It was not loud. That was what struck me. Loud sounds are easy. You categorize them, dismiss them, fall back asleep. This was a slow, rhythmic dragging. Deliberate. The pauses between each movement were long enough that I'd convince myself it had stopped. And then it would begin again. It came from the wall adjacent to my bedroom, which shared a surface with Gerald's apartment. I lay still and listened for 20 minutes. Then I put in earphones and told myself old buildings settle, old men pace, and I had work in the morning. The smell intensified over the following 2 days. On Saturday, I knocked on Gerald's door. I told myself I was checking in. What I was doing was looking for permission to stop worrying, the way you go to a doctor hoping to be told it's nothing. He didn't answer. This was not unusual enough to act on. I slid a note under his door, the kind of note designed to seem casual, mentioning the smell in a general, communal way, leaving my number. I felt better for having done it. Nothing changed. By Monday, the smell had moved from the hallway into my apartment. It came through the shared wall in a way I cannot fully explain, as if the plaster itself had become porous to it. I opened windows. I burned a candle. I stood in my kitchen at 6 in the morning and understood. With a clarity I did not want that I already knew what the smell was. I had known for days. I had been spending considerable energy not knowing it. I called the building superintendent. He came, knocked on Gerald's door, used his key. I stood in the hallway and did not look inside. What I heard was the superintendent's footsteps stopping very quickly, and then a long silence, and then the sound of him on his phone saying words in a low, controlled voice that people use when they are trying not to use other words. I looked at the carpet. I looked at the beige wall. I looked at a small crack running from the baseboard toward the ceiling that I had never noticed before, and that I would notice every day afterward. Gerald Foss had been dead for approximately 9 days. The police came. The building manager came. I gave a statement in my apartment while 2 officers sat in my kitchen and asked questions. I answered carefully and honestly. They were professional and not unkind. One of them had a coffee stain on his sleeve. These are the details you retain. What I did not tell them, what I have not told anyone until now, is what I heard the night after they removed the body. I was not asleep. I was lying in the same position I had been in for hours, facing the wall, watching the pale rectangle of streetlight on my ceiling shift as cars passed below. The building was quiet. The smell was already beginning to fade, replaced by something chemical and deliberate. At 2:17 a.m., I know the time because I looked at my phone. I heard the dragging sound again, slow, rhythmic, coming from inside 4B. The same pauses, the same patience. I lay completely still for a very long time. In the morning, I called the building manager and asked to be moved to a different floor. She seemed unsurprised. She told me there was a unit available on the 2nd floor, that I could move at the end of the month, that she was sorry for what I had experienced. I said thank you. I did not tell her about the sound. I did not see the point. I moved on the last day of October. I have lived on the 2nd floor for 4 months now. The carpet here is the same color. The walls are the same beige. Some nights I still face away from the wall when I sleep. I'm not sure it helps. The smell hit me before anything else. Copper and something older, like wet earth, turned up after a long winter. I'd been working night security at the Harlan Building for 11 months, and I knew every scent that place had. The industrial cleaner the janitors used on Tuesdays. The stale coffee from the break room on the 4th floor. The faint diesel breath that rose from the parking garage below. This was none of those. This was wrong in a way I couldn't name yet. It was 2:47 in the morning when I noticed the elevator had stopped responding to my calls. The panel in my booth showed it sitting on the 6th floor, the one we kept locked. Nobody worked up there. The renovation had stalled 2 years ago when the developer ran out of money, and the floor had been sealed off ever since. My job description was clear. Monitor the cameras. Walk the perimeter every 2 hours. Call the police if anything moved that shouldn't. Simple work. Quiet work. The kind of work you take when you need time alone with your thoughts. I radioed the situation to dispatch, got static, tried again, got more static. My phone showed full bars, but the call wouldn't connect. I told myself the building's frame was interfering. It happened sometimes near the stairwell, and I picked up my flashlight and went to check the breaker panel on the 2nd floor. Standard procedure. The lights in the stairwell were fine. Everything was fine until I reached the landing between the 3rd and 4th floors and heard the sound. It wasn't loud. That's what I keep coming back to. It was so quiet, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it a slow, rhythmic scraping, like a chair being dragged across concrete in a room directly overhead. One pull. Pause. One pull. Pause. I stood still and counted 12 times. Then it stopped. I went back to my booth. I pulled up the camera feed for the 4th floor and saw nothing. The hallway empty. The ceiling lights buzzing their usual pale yellow. Then I switched to the camera, angled at the elevator doors on 4. The elevator was no longer on 6. The display above the doors read 4. I had not heard it move. I had not heard the bell that always sounded when it arrived at a floor. It was simply there now, its doors closed, the number glowing quietly like it had been there all night. I should have called it in, gotten someone else to deal with it, gone home at the end of my shift and not thought about it again. Instead, I went up. I don't know why. There is a part of the human mind that moves toward the thing it fears, some ancient reflex dressed up as curiosity or duty. I rode the elevator to the 4th floor and stepped out into the hallway. The scraping started again the moment my feet hit the floor. It was coming from the end of the hall, from behind the door marked records, a room I'd walked past hundreds of times without opening. The door had no lock, only a handle. I put my hand on it and pushed. The room was dark except for the reach of my flashlight. Filing cabinets lined 3 walls. In the center of the room, a chair sat facing away from me. And in the chair sat a man, very still, his hands resting flat on his knees. He was wearing the same uniform I was wearing. The same gray shirt, the same black trousers, the same company patch on the shoulder. I said something, I don't remember what. The man didn't respond. I took 3 steps forward and put the flashlight on him and saw his face in profile and felt the floor go soft under me, 'cause the face was mine. Not similar, not a resemblance. Mine exactly, down to the scar below my left ear from a bicycle accident when I was 9 years old. I backed out of the room. I walked to the elevator. I rode it down to the lobby. I sat in my booth and watched the camera feeds for the rest of the shift without moving, without eating, without taking my eyes off the screen that showed the hallway outside the records room. The door did not open again. At 6 in the morning, my replacement arrived. I gave him the log, told him the elevator had been glitching, said nothing else. I drove home in daylight with both hands on the wheel and the radio on loud. That was 8 weeks ago. I still work nights, different building now, different city. I've told myself a dozen different explanations. Exhaustion, a mirror I hadn't noticed, something wrong with the light. I've almost believed some of them. What I haven't been able to explain is what I found in my jacket pocket when I got home that morning. A company badge, identical to mine, with my name, my photo, my employee number. Except the lanyard was frayed at the end, cut or chewed through. And the back of the badge, where mine is blank, had 4 words written in my own handwriting. Don't come back up.